I have started moving stuff down here from my former office at Celebration Church. And it's amazing what you find when you move. You know, everybody ought to have to move like every 10 years because you find yourself throwing out a lot of stuff. I've been getting rid of books. I have literally thousands of books. I'm a big reader, and for years, long before the internet, those of us in ministry, you had to carry your libraries with you. There was not this online library stuff like there is today, and I've been sorting, and I ran across, and I hate to say I forgot it, although I really did, in all honesty, this picture, which is kind of small, you're not going to be able to see it, it's this. And what this is a pen and ink drawing of the Millville Christian Church in Millville, Pennsylvania. That's my hometown. And on the back of it, it was given to my grandmother. I ended up with this after she died somehow. I don't recall the details anymore. But her name was Edith Lyons. And it honored her church membership. She had been a member. She joined the Millville Christian Church in 1916 and was given this plaque in 1977. My grandmother died in 1986. So, this was several years before her death. But she was a member of that congregation for 80 years, roughly. Something like that. And that's what this was. Well, after she died, we were going through her things, and I ran across this. I was pastoring in Iowa at the time, and I thought, I'll keep this. And it's been a long time to be honest, since I thought about my home church. The area where I come from, how to describe it? How many of you know the Newhart Show? Remember the Newhart Show when it was like he ran the bed and breakfast in New England and all that? Okay. You know that helicopter shot at the beginning where they're kind of coming and you're looking at the valley and you can see the church steeple sticking up out of the church? That's where I come from. Looks just like that. And the church steeple is the Millville Christian Church. It's a white frame, kind of building in the middle of the town. And it was in that building as a kid, being sternly looked at by my grandmother. She was very old school on things like this. But in that building, I learned the stories of Abraham and Sarah, and Elijah and Elisha, and Ruth and Esther, and of course, Jesus. I was baptized in that church. My uncle at that time was the pastor, so I was baptized by my own uncle. My cousins all went there. We all sat together in the same pew. I've told you that story before. I preached my first sermon there. It was a youth Sunday. You'll be interested to know my first sermon really made quite the bang because in the middle of the sermon I fainted. Literally. Fell backwards right off the pulpit. It was raised like this. In that sanctuary, the organ sat right behind the pulpit. I fell back, my head hit the organ, and to this day there is a dent in the organ. My now grown children are showing my grandchildren the dent where Grandpa's head hit the organ. This is true. It was in that church, though, in that white frame clapboard building, I learned what church was. And some of those lessons were good ones. Lots of them were good ones. But some were not. I remember one time in particular, I'd been about Dylan's age, probably 7th grade. I was middle school age. And it was a spring Sunday morning. We did not have air conditioning. So on nice days, the windows were up. The church lot, had maple trees all the way around it. So as a kid, I mostly sat, we always hoped to get close to the window because I knew the windows would be open and I could look out and see what was going on outside. And it was one of those days. Birds were singing in the trees. It was it was warm for spring. Kind of a lazy day, and I was sitting there, supposed to be listening to my uncle, who was not a very interesting speaker, I did not think. Of course, I had known him from his Selling International Truck days, so it was a little hard for me to see him as a pastor. So I was gazing out the window instead of listening to the preacher. It was one of those kind of days. Just another day in the worship life of the Millville Christian Church. And then we had double doors in the back, right in the center where that banner would be. We had double doors. That's how you came into the sanctuary. And those were double swing doors, and they creaked. They just never could, then how much they oiled the springs, those doors just creaked. And I remember hearing, and I thought, somebody's coming in the middle of the sermon. And I looked back, and it was not somebody who was coming in late, actually. It was a man who had a Fu Manchu mustache, which was real controversial at the time, had a tattoo on his left arm, and it was very apparent he had never been in church before because he came through the doors, stood in the center of the back of the sanctuary with his arms folded this way, and just stood there. I didn't know who he was. I don't think anybody really knew who he was. And he stood there in the middle of the aisle in the back of the church with his arms folded across his chest. He didn't interrupt worship. He was just standing there, waiting, I guess. Minister preached on. My uncle continued to preach the sermon, but by now everybody's kind of watching. We sang the invitation hymn, prayed the benediction, and what it was, come to find out later, his daughter had chosen to come to Sunday school that day. We were right in the middle of town. She had walked up to Sunday school, and he had walked up to pick her up, not knowing quite what the church schedule was. And also, I mean, you don't think about it, and don't take this wrong, because every church has this. We all have our way we start church. And if you're new, that way is strange. Heaven help you if you sit in the wrong spot. This is not the only church, though, that does this. I know who's here by which spots are filled, and I'm still new. Y'all are not predictable, but you're not the only one. Seen this before, and the Millville Christian Church was no exception. That guy, whoever it was, to this day I do not know the guy's name, but that image of him standing in the back of the church with his arms folded and his tattoo, which tattoos at that time were very controversial. Today they're almost normal, but they weren't then. Standing there, that is etched in my brain, probably for as long as I live, not because of what happened. You know, somebody actually came in and stood, but because of what didn't happen. That fellow stood in the back of our sanctuary for easily 10, 12 minutes. Not a single person invited him to sit down. No one got up and offered him a worship folder. No one even got up and bothered to ask him how we could help him. My uncle couldn't even pause in the delivery of the sermon long enough to invite the person, this guy, to participate in worship. You see, Millville, Pennsylvania is a very little teeny tiny multi-generational town. There are twice as many kids in my middle school as there were inhabitants of my small town. This is a small town place where in theory everybody knows everybody, and that's especially true in the churches. You see, we'd all been born into the Millville Christian Church. We had grown up there, and we didn't know what to do with somebody who walked in with a Fu Manchu mustache and a tattoo on their arm. We had no idea how to treat somebody who was new and different and lost, and who that morning happened to stumble on our worship service. And even as a kid, I remember being embarrassed. Not for him, for us. It was obvious, even to my 7th grade mind, that this guy just wasn't very welcome in our church. And then all these people who had helped me, come to know Jesus and talk to me about the stories of faith did not know what to do with the stranger in our midst. Today's scripture, which Barb read, is actually the very, very end of quite a long